Good day, everyone. I am Mr. Mark Anthony Lumpines, your instructor for this course, Introduction to the Philosophy of the Human Person. In today's lecture, I will be discussing to you Module 3 of the course entitled Methods of Philosophizing. Objectives are the following. Learning objectives are the following. At the end of this lesson, students are expected to: number 1, distinguish opinion from truth; number 2, analyze situations that show the difference; number 3, realize that the methods of philosophy lead to wisdom and truth; and evaluate opinions. Okay, we will be discussing in this lecture the different methods of philosophizing. In the last chapter, the meaning and process of doing philosophy, emphasizing the importance of holism as well as learning how to construct philosophical ways, were introduced. This chapter shall demonstrate the various ways of doing philosophy. In search for wisdom, the learner must evaluate arguments and ways of expressing one's beliefs, emotions, and opinions. In search for wisdom, diba, which is the goal of philosophy, you as learners must be capable of evaluating arguments. You must be capable of determining what is truth from opinion. You must be capable of knowing the ways of expressing one's beliefs, emotions, and opinions. And all of those can be possible if you know the different methods of philosophizing. This section shall introduce methods or ways of looking at truth and what will be considered as mere opinions. Philosophizing in the first place is to think or express oneself in a philosophical manner. It considers or discusses a matter from a philosophical standpoint. So before proceeding to the different methods of philosophizing, we will try to understand first what philosophizing is all about. When we say philosophizing, it is to think. It is to express oneself in a philosophical manner. It is to think like a philosopher, diba? It is to express oneself like a philosopher. It is like to discuss a certain thing or a certain topic from a philosophical standpoint. That is philosophizing. And there are four methods of philosophizing. The four methods of philosophizing are Phenomenology, Existentialism, Postmodernism, and Logic. Okay, what is Phenomenology? In this method of philosophizing, truth is understood or understand based on person's consciousness. In Phenomenology, in this first method, truth is derived based on person's consciousness or awareness. So, while in existentialism, truth is based in exercising choices and freedom. What is the difference? Sa phenomenology, truth is truth is based on person's consciousness, diba? We will find out the truth from mere opinion based on your own consciousness, your own awareness of what is really that particular thing all about. Diba? Si phenomenology, it established or it discussed a particular topic based on person's consciousness. Well, existentialism, the second method of philosophizing, truth is based in exercising choices and personal freedom. So in existentialism, truth can be understood once you exercise choices and personal freedom, diba? You can only understand what is true to a certain thing or a certain matter once you exercise your own choices and your own personal freedom. In postmodernism, the third methods of philosophizing, it is accepted that truth is not absolute. Like for example, culture. Diba? Culture is a way of life and it is dynamic. And postmodernism believe that truth is not absolute like culture, diba? Truth is not absolute. Therefore, truth is dynamic. From time to time, it changes. And last method of philosophizing is logic. Truth is based on reasoning and critical thinking. So, see, logic, you can know the truth about a particular thing through exercising reasoning and critical thinking. Take note of the four methods of philosophizing that all things that we are going to discuss in this chapter will revolve on the four methods of philosophizing: phenomenology, existentialism, postmodernism, and logic. Sa phenomenology, truth is derived based on person's consciousness, diba? Person's awareness of what is true to a particular thing or not. Um, what is true to a particular thing or particular matter, diba? Through evaluating one's consciousness. In existentialism, truth is based on exercising choices and personal freedom. You can only understand um, the truth about things by using your own individual choice and personal freedom. In postmodernism, truth is accepted that it is not absolute. That means it is dynamic, like, for example, culture. And logic, the last method, truth is based on reasoning and critical thinking. Okay, the first method of philosophizing is phenomenology. As mentioned kanina, it centers on consciousness, meaning si phenomenology as method of philosophizing, um, it tries to understand the truth of a particular thing through evaluating one's consciousness or awareness. It was founded by Edmund Husserl. Edmund Husserl founded phenomenology, which is essentially a philosophical method. Take note, the founder of phenomenology is Edmund Husserl, and phenomenology is essentially a philosophical method. This method focuses on careful inspection and description of phenomena or appearances, defined as any object of conscious experience, that is, that which we are conscious of, according to Johnston 2006. Take note, phenomenology as method of philosophizing or philosophical method focuses on careful inspection and description of phenomena or appearances, di ba? Phenomenology. So from the term itself, masabda nato, it studies phenomenon. It studies phenomena or appearances. So phenomenology as method of philosophizing, it focuses on the inspection and description of phenomena or appearances, and defined as any object of conscious experience, being defined as object of conscious experience, that is, that which we are conscious of. So phenomenology as method of philosophizing, it focuses on describing the phenomena, describing happening or appearances of a particular thing, based also on one's personal conscious experience, that is, that which we are conscious of. In Husserl's logical investigations, he argued against psychologism. So si Edmund Husserl, in founding his phenomenology, or this phenomenology as philosophical method, he argued against psychologism. What is psychologism? It is the thesis that truth is dependent on the peculiarities of the human mind. That means, and that is, philosophy is reducible to psychology. So, si Edmund Husserl, in his book Logical Investigation, he argued against psychologism. Ano yung psychologism? Psychologism believe, or it is the thesis, that truth is dependent on the peculiarities of the human mind, and that is, philosophy is reducible to psychology. Philosophy is reducible to psychology. So Edmund Husserl argue against psychologism. So he doesn't believe that philosophy is reducible to psychology. In other words, it was an argument against the very thesis that he himself had argued in his first book on the philosophy of arithmetic. His continuing effort was dedicated on developing a method for finding and guaranteeing the truth, and that method was phenomenology, diba? Which is um, against or not amenable with psychologism. The word phenomenon comes directly from the Greek phenomenon, meaning appearance. So, um, from its etymology itself, masabta nato that nga si phenomenology, it studies appearances. It studies phenomena by evaluating persons' consciousness. Immanuel Kant, are you familiar with Immanuel Kant, the founder of Kantianism? Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher, had used the same word to refer to the world of our experience. So si Immanuel Kant, he also used the same word, phenomenon, di ba? To refer to the world of our experience. Di ba? Husserl intends a similar meaning except for the crucial fact that for him, it does not imply a contrast between the appearance and some underlying reality, between the phenomenon and the contrast between the phenomenon and the nomenon, or the thing in itself. And that, according to Husserl, is where the trouble starts when one supposes that one experiences is not or might not be the truth, according to Solomon and Higgins 2010. Again, the word phenomenon, tracing its etymology, it came from Greek phenomenon, meaning appearance. So phenomenology, it studies phenomenon or it studies appearance. The same word was used by Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher, which he refers to the world of our own experience. Um, Husserl intends a similar meaning, except for the crucial fact that for him, it does not imply only a contrast between the appearance and some underlying reality between the phenomenon and the nomenon or the thing in itself. According to Husserl, the trouble starts when one supposes that one experiences is not or might not be the truth, according to Solomon or Higgins 2010. So para kay Edmund Husserl, so phenomenology, it tries to understand the truth, di ba? By understanding the world of our experience. It tries to derive the truth by evaluating one's consciousness or one's awareness of the world through our own experience. Further, phenomenology as method of philosophizing is the scientific study of essential structures of consciousness. So it is a scientific study, but it follows also a step-by-step process, the same with social science disciplines and natural science disciplines, which studies only the essential structures, the important structures of one's consciousness. By describing those structures, Husserl believes that we can find certainty, which philosophy has always sought. This process entails a method or a series of continuous revised methods for taking up a peculiarly phenomenological standpoint, bracketing out everything that is not essential, thereby understanding the basic rules or constitutive processes through which consciousness does its work of knowing the world. So, in short, phenomenology, it is a scientific study, um, a method of philosophy that tries to study the structures of consciousness. It tries to understand a particular thing through evaluating human consciousness of that particular thing, diba? Um, it is understanding the basic rules or constitutive process through which consciousness does its work of knowing the world. Husserl's phenomenology is the thesis that consciousness is intentional. Okay, by evaluating or by discussing Husserl's phenomenology or Husserl's phenomenology in short, believe that consciousness is intentional. Every act of consciousness is directed at some object or another, possibly a material object or an ideal object, for example, mathematics. The phenomenologists can distinguish and describe the nature of intentional acts of consciousness and the intentional objects of consciousness, which are defined through the content of consciousness. Notably, one can describe the content of consciousness and accordingly the object of consciousness without any particular commitment to the actuality or existence of that object. Thus, one can describe the content of a dream in much the same terms that one describes the view from television or scene from a novel. Again, thus, one can describe the content of a dream in much the same terms that one describes the view from a television or scene from a novel. Because Edmund Husserl believed that consciousness is intentional. Diba? Every act of consciousness is directed to some object, diba? Intentional object. Phenomenologists can distinguish and describe the nature of intentional acts of consciousness and the intentional objects of consciousness. Further, the inspection and description are supposed to be affected without any presuppositions, including any as to whether such objects of consciousness are real or correspond to something external or what their causes or consequences may be. This method uncovers the essential structures of experience. Take note, diba? Essential structures of consciousness, experience and then its object, experience and its object. The sorts of experiences and the phenomena that phenomenologists have sought to describe are highly varied. For instance, time consciousness, mathematics, logic, perception and experience of the social world, experience of our own bodies, moral, aesthetic, religious experiences according to Solomon and Higgins 2010. Phenomenological standpoint is achieved through a series of phenomenological reductions that eliminate certain aspects of our experience from consideration. Edmund Husserl formulates several of these, and their emphasis shifts throughout his career. So, Edmund Husserl came up with phenomenological reduction because he believed that phenomenological standpoint is achieved through a series of phenomenological reductions. The first and the best known is epoch or suspension. Diba? First, phenomenological reduction. The epoch or suspension that he describes in Ideas, General Introduction to Pure Phenomenology, in which the phenomenologist brackets all the questions of truth or reality and simply describes the contents of consciousness. Diba? Brackets all questions of truth and reality by simply describing the contents of consciousness. The second reduction eliminates the merely empirical contents of consciousness. So it eliminates the empirical contents of consciousness and focusing instead on the essential features and meanings of consciousness. So to think like a phenomenologist is achieved through a series of phenomenological reduction. The first one is suspension, like bracketing all questions of truth or reality by simply describing the contents of consciousness, diba? And then the second reduction eliminates the empirical contents of consciousness, but focusing on instead on the essential features and meaning of such consciousness. Thus, Husserl defends a notion of intuition that differs from and is more specialized than ordinary notion of experience. Some intuitions are eidetic, that is, they reveal necessary truths, not just the contingencies of the natural world. These are the essence of phenomenology. Okay, let's sum it. In summary, in sum, what interests the phenomenologists are the contents of consciousness. So the concern of phenomenologists like Husserl is to understand the content of person's consciousness, di ba? Person's awareness, not on things of the natural world as such. In Ideas, di ba? The book of Husserl, in Ideas, General Introduction to Pure Phenomenology, Husserl distinguishes between the natural world and phenomenological standpoint. So there is a difference between the natural world and phenomenological standpoint. So in summary again, what interests the phenomenologists are the contents of consciousness, diba? Not on things of the natural world as such, but on phenomenological standpoint. In Ideas, Husserl distinguishes between the natural world and phenomenological standpoint. The former is the ordinary viewpoint. The former, or the natural world, refers to our ordinary everyday viewpoint, and the ordinary stance of the natural sciences, describing the things and states of affairs. The latter is a special viewpoint achieved by phenomenologists, as he or she focuses not on things but our consciousness of things, according to Solomon Hagen's 2010. So in in summary, phenomenology as method of philosophizing try to understand the truth of a particular thing, a particular phenomena, appearances, happening, by focusing on things itself, but focusing on our consciousness of what that particular thing is all about. So it evaluates our consciousness of that particular thing before coming up with a conclusion, or before coming up, or before deriving the truth of a particular thing. That is phenomenology. Later also, I will be uploading a video presentation about phenomenology for you to further understand what does phenomenology is all about. Okay, next method of philosophizing is existentialism. As I made mention kanina, existentialism focuses on freedom, or exercising of choices and personal freedom. Now, in existentialism, one's search for truth might be based on one's attitude or outlook. So in phenomenology, one's search for truth is based on evaluating personal consciousness of a particular thing. In existentialism, one's search for truth might be based on one's attitude or outlook. Nakadepende sa imong attitude o imong outlook, panglantaw, imong pananaw. Take for instance, existentialism. Unlike phenomenology, di ba? Dili pareho ni phenomenology. Existentialism is not primarily a philosophical method. So it is not a primarily a philosophical method. Existentialism, take note, is not primarily a philosophical method. Neither is it exactly a set of doctrines, but more of an outlook or attitude supported by diverse doctrines centered on certain common themes. Take note, existentialism is not primarily a philosophical method. Instead, it is an outlook, diba? It is an attitude supported by diverse doctrines centered on certain common themes. To cite an example of existentialists, meaning they value more the importance of the exercise of choices, individual choices and freedom. We have Jean-Paul Sartre, di ba? Jean-Paul Sartre. We have Soren Kierkegaard. And then many more existentialists. I myself also, I am an existentialist because I believe that we are the creator of our own destiny, diba? Having that motto in life, that is existentialist point of view. That's my outlook, diba? That is how I look at life. That is, we are the only we are the character of our own life. We are the one who create what our life, 'di ba, to be in the future. Like for example, para sa kuha, ikaw ang nagpili sa imuhang life nga mahitabo sa future. Like for example, if you do good in your studies, 'di ba? If you do well in your studies, 'di ba? Have there is a great possibility that you can have a good life, 'di ba? In the near future. That is existentialist point of view. So existentialism, di siya pareho ni phenomenology nga it is really a philosophical method of understanding the truth by evaluating personal consciousness. But existentialism, it is just an outlook or attitude supported by diverse doctrines centered on certain common themes. So what are the themes mentioned, or what are the themes, 'di ba? Diverse doctrines centered on certain common themes. What are the themes? These themes include human condition, or the relation of the individual to the world. So existentialism is more on emphasizing human condition, 'di ba? What is our condition? Uh, what are your condition as human? What are your relation, 'di ba, to the world? 'Di ba, the relation of the individual to the world? Human response to that condition, human being itself, especially the difference between the being of person, which is the existence, and the being of other kinds of things. Human freedom, significance of choice and decision in absence of certainty, and the concreteness and subjectivity of life as lived against abstraction and false objectifications. If we may generalize for just a moment, we might suggest that the existentialists share a concern for the individual and personal responsibility. Existentialism is often thought to be anti-religious. Some would say existentialism is anti-religious. Is often thought to be anti-religious. Nevertheless, there has been a strong current of Christian existentialism, beginning with the 19th century Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. Why do you think so? Existentialism is often marked or often thought to be anti-religious, by exercising one's choice or freedom. Um, um, there are really individuals who really have an existentialist point of view. That is, they believe that they can understand or they can know the truth about things by exploring on their own, diba? By exercising their own choices and their own freedom. So sometimes mamark siya, existentialism is often thought to be anti-religious. However, it is emphasized that existentialism is not anti-religious because in the beginning, diba, Soren Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher, he emphasized or introduced Christian existentialism that makes existentialism applicable also in Christianity, diba? As the first existentialist, Soren Kierkegaard insisted that the authentic self was the personally chosen self, as opposed to the public or herd identity. Take note for this class. According to Soren Kierkegaard, the authentic self, the original self, was the personally chosen self, as opposed to the public or herd identity, diba? Whether we like it or not, the way we expose kita mismo sa tong kaugalingon, kita ang nakaila kung kinsa ta, unsa ta nga pagkatao, di ba? There are people nga sa public makita nimo nga ay inana siya, di ba? Inana siya nga tao, buutan siya, matinabangon siya. but that is exposed or presented in the public, 'di ba? That is only said to be herd identity, 'di ba? Public identity. However, the authentic self was the personally chosen self. The true self is personally chosen self. Ikaw ra mismo ang nakabalo, 'di ba? Ikaw mismo ang nakaila as to who, what is, or what kind of person, 'di ba? You are, 'di ba? What is your authentic self? So Kierkegaard insisted or believed that authentic self was the personally chosen self, as opposed to the public or herd identity. So if you notice, um, if you notice individuals, so really, um, the identity of individuals, if you try to understand individuals as to how they act or behave in public, that is not their authentic self. That is their herd identity. Because the authentic self is the personally chosen self. Meaning, ikaw mismo sa imong kaugalingon ang nakaila kung unsa ka o kinsa ka nga pagkatao. Nietzsche took this view of opposition of the genuine individual versus the public herd identity. Both Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, I don't know how to pronounce his family name, influenced Heidegger, diba? Whose conception of ownness came to dominate the contemporary existentialist thought. Existentialism's relationship to phenomenology is a matter of some controversy. However, some philosophers, such as Jean-Paul Sartre, who is an existentialist, have employed phenomenological methods to arrive at or support their specific variations on existential themes. Some would say that the relationship between existentialism and phenomenology is somewhat controversial. However, there are some existentialists who also use phenomenological method in arriving um, in supporting their specific variations on existential themes. One search for truth by means of critical is a rational choice. Existentialism, with Sartre, a French philosopher, emphasizes the importance of free individual choice. So in existentialism, one search for truth is through the means of critical thinking or is a rational choice, through exercising rational choice. Further, Sartre emphasizes in the importance of free individual choice in existentialism, regardless of the power of other people to influence and coerce our desires, beliefs, and decisions. Sartre argued that consciousness, being for itself, is such that it is always free to choose, though not free not to choose and free to negate or reject the given features of the world. One is never free of one situation. Sartre tells us, but one is always free to negate the situation or try to change it. According to Sartre, to be human is to be conscious. To be human, to be conscious is to be free to imagine, free to choose, and responsible for one's life. So for existentialists like Sartre, Soren Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, they believe they really emphasize the importance of free individual choice in becoming human, diba? Or in becoming a empowered human being, and then in arriving at truth. They believe that or especially Sartre, he believed that to be human is to be conscious and is to be free to imagine, free to choose, and responsible for one's life. Take note, you are responsible for your own life. You have the freedom to choose what life you're going to take. You have the freedom to imagine of what will happen, diba? Will happen to your life. Make sure to exercise this individual choice properly, diba? Properly in order to have really a good life. One may be shy or assertive, but such behavior is always a choice. Take note, you can be shy as you are. You can be assertive as you are. But that behavior, according to existentialist point of view, is always a product of one choice. Imo ng own choice, di ba? Choice na nimo. Kung ulawon ka, choice man na nimo. And one can always resolve to change. Take note, change is the only permanent thing in this world. Di ba? Even behavior, even your personality, it can be changed. As long as you want to change it. One can be Asian or American, but it is often questioned how one will make of oneself. How these will be made into handicaps or an advantage, become challenges to be overcome, or excuses doing nothing. Sartre's philosophy would have a particular poignance in the midst of the horrors of war and occupation. The positive notion of authenticity or good faith remained a problem for Sartre. However, and one of the continuing criticisms of existentialism is the obscurity and the seeming elusiveness of the ideal authenticity. The notion of authenticity is not new. Socrates already concerned himself with the authenticity of the self, the genuineness of his thoughts and actions, the good of his soul. He sought not mere opinions, but knowledge, self-knowledge in particular, and prescribed not just right action, but virtue, being opposed to the inauthentic, diba? Being true to oneself. Again, the notion of authenticity is not new because it is also emphasized by some Greek philosophers like Socrates, diba? Socrates, Plato. For Socrates, um, the beginning of knowledge is self-knowledge, the same with Plato. And they already concerned themselves with the authenticity of the self, the original self, the authentic self, which is the genuineness of his thoughts and actions, the good of his soul. He sought not mere opinions, but knowledge, self-knowledge in particular. Also, aside from Socrates, Plato, we have also Saint Augustine, who was concerned with the spiritual nature of the true self, as opposed to the inauthentic demands of the desire and the body. Aside from St. Augustine, we have also Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was adamant about the essential goodness of the natural self, in contrast to the corruption imposed by the society. So, also, Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that human has essential goodness, diba, of natural self. Diba natin, innate goodness, as opposed or in contrast to the corruption imposed by the society. Although existentialism has been on one since the 1960s, it has enjoyed exceptional prominence, even popularity, for a philosophical movement in part because of its literary expressions by writers such as Sartre, Albert Camus, Simone de Beauvoir, and Gabriel Marcel. All of them are all existentialists. Okay, aside from phenomenology and existentialism, the next method of philosophizing is postmodernism. This belief that the truth is not absolute. Truth is dynamic, like culture, diba? Postmodernism focuses on culture. Postmodernism has come into vogue as a name for a rather diffuse family of ideas and trends that is, or that in significant respect rejects, challenges, or aims to supersede modernity. The convictions, aspirations, and the pretensions of the modern Western thought and the culture since the Enlightenment period. Postmodernism is not a philosophy. Take note, postmodernism is not a philosophy. It is at best holding a pattern, perhaps a cry of despair. It lightly talks about the world philosophy, the philosophy of many cultures, but such talk is not a philosophy either. Postmodernism is not a philosophy, but it only talks the philosophy of many cultures. Diba? Culture is dynamic. Also, in postmodernism, truth is not absolute. The truth of things, diba? Postmodernists believe that change is the only permanent thing in this world. Diba? Things really change. The same with truth. That is for postmodernism. For instance, reality cannot be known nor described objectively by postmodernists because they believe the reality, the truth of reality, the reality of things is not absolute. So they cannot describe objectively what is reality of the world. The American philosopher Richard Rorty, notably developing themes from pragmatism and certain quarters of analytic philosophy and bringing these together with continental themes, challenged the modern rationalist presumption that philosophy or any branch of knowledge can find secure foundations to achieve genuine representation of reality. Postmodernists believe that the humanity should come at truth beyond the rational to the non-rational. Postmodernists believe that humanity should come at truth or should arrive at truth beyond rational to the non-rational elements of human nature. That means that includes spiritual. Postmodernists believe that we can understand the truth by not just merely understanding rational things, but also consider non-rational or irrational elements of human nature, diba? Including the spiritual, the things that cannot be explained by any scientific discipline, diba? Um, um, the element of human nature which cannot be explained by rational thinking. That is the idea of postmodernists. Postmodernists believe that there are non-rational elements of human nature that could also help in arriving the truth about the reality of the world, the reality of human life. Postmodernists consider that to arrive at truth, humanity should realize the limits of reason and objectivism. That is for postmodernists. Postmodernists emphasize that in order for us to arrive at truth, humanity should realize that truth cannot be understood only based on reason and objectivism or through being objective or by being rational. There are things that cannot be explained by rational discipline, di ba? Cannot be explained by science, di ba? Um, they cannot be explained through non-rational, cannot be explained through rational ways, di ba? There are really things that cannot be explained by scientific disciplines through reason, diba? There are really things that cannot be explained through objectivism. Beyond exalting individual analysis of truth, postmodernists adhere to relational or holistic approach. Moreover, postmodernists value our existence in a world and our relation to it. That is postmodernism. That is why for postmodernists, truth is not absolute because it cannot be understood only through rational means, but also considering non-rational elements of human nature. Like for example, in describing the reality of the world, diba? For example, the beginning of the world. How does the world begin, diba? That question really um, um, is being gisulayan og tubag sa various scientists, diba? How does the world begin? Some would say, or in a rational point of view, we have Big Bang theory, diba? We have the social contract theory, naghan. Oh, however, pag mo sa non-rational elements of human nature, spiritual aspect, um, spiritual aspect, they would say that the world is created by a supernatural being, diba? Which is God. That is the idea of postmodernism. The last one is analytic tradition or logic, diba? Logic and critical thinking, analytic tradition. Okay, I will make another video lecture for analytic tradition and logic because considering that medyo mahaba si logic, di ba?